Welcome to our meeting this evening. Thank you for coming out. It's a topic that I think is relevant for a lot of us, and I'd like to introduce our panel. We have Ron Cameron, Under Sheriff of Clown County, Wendy Sisk, the head of Peninsula Behavioral Health, Marc Jackson, who's the superintendent of schools, Emily Menchu is a senior at school, and of course we know Brian from Smith from the city of Port Angeles, Ellen Fetchiet, also a healthcare professional, and Ken Dubuc. And we want to go down in the order, starting with Ron, and down through so Ken will be the wrap-up guy. Keep an eye on him. Okay. So what we want to do is they'll each have 8 to 10 minutes to talk, and at the end of 8 minutes, if there's any indication that they're still talking and carrying on, then Bill will give them a sign, and then let them talk and conclude their comments within the next couple of minutes after that. We want to get through this first hour and then leave at least a half an hour for questions from the audience, and then if there are additional questions after 7:30 and somebody wants to stick around afterwards, they can talk to whichever person is here. So without much further ado, I think we have a passed out thing. I think most of you picked up one of these when you came in. There's a couple of purposes for it. When we have the questions section, what I like to do is have people address the panel and the group from the podium over there, and Betsy will have the mic on for you. If you're not comfortable talking in front of a group like that, or if you want to just put it in writing, Betsy will read it. So you can do it either way. And then finally, when you get ready to leave this evening, if you would make some comments on here in the bottom, and if there's a topic that we've identified below that would be of interest to you later, let us know, and just leave them at the door when you go out. So that's the guidelines. What I did when I talked to the panel and encouraged them to join us this evening is I asked them some basic questions. And they're going to address the questions that are relevant from their professional perspective. But we talked about what should a person do if they think someone is a threat to the community or to themselves? And how do the police respond to the information they get? Who should you talk to? And so forth. So they have these questions. They're not relevant for each one of them. But without further ado, I'd like to let Ron talk a little bit about the Sheriff's Department and how you address these issues.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for having me here tonight. You want me to use the mic?
Yeah, get a little closer.
Can you hear me now? Okay, good. First of all, Sheriff Benedict expresses his apologies for not being here. We got double booked tonight. He's out in Joyce talking to a group of folks out there at the same time. So I know he wanted to be here, but instead I got elected. Here I am. I also want to thank everybody for letting me go first. Oh yeah, it's always fun to be the first guy. So, obviously, something happened a few weeks ago that sparked something new in our country that I don't think there's any turning back, and I don't think this is going to go away. I think that one of the most important things we can do is make our kids safe and our communities safe, and I think that's been paramount. It's always been paramount and important to us all. The thing is we can't all do it by ourselves. We have to do it together, and that's why I think this panel's up here, and why Mr. Cobb asked us all to come together to explain to you some of the things that we do and give you folks some suggestions on what you can do as far as the citizenry that can help us all be a safer community. And I think that's what I'm here today for. So, we'll begin by letting you know that as a law enforcement community, we're very unique here in Clallam County. You need to understand that even in Washington State, you go to other places, and there's a difference between the Sheriff's Department and the Police Department. And when I say that, they don't often work very closely together. It's different here. It really doesn't matter what kind of uniform you have on, whether you're a Squim police officer, a Force police officer, a tribal police officer. We all work together, help each other, and respond together to any major event. If Chief Smith here in Port Angeles has, or help us, a double homicide tonight, and he is overly busy, my deputies are going to go in and take calls in the city, and there's no questions asked. And the other way around, if all my guys are out in Squim, the PA officers will respond out in the county. It's just that way around here. We do that. And we also train together. I think many of you know, or if you don't, each year, coming on point today, we work together in building a exercise somewhere in the county to respond and deal with active shooter situations. Not just police, but fire, hospital, ambulance, all the services come together. Last year we did it up at the college, if everybody remembers. And we work in fine-tuning our response to that. This doesn't just help us in our response, but it also helps the different schools and stuff identify their perhaps holes and things that they need to do to shore up their emergency plans. Just today, Chief Criminal Deputy Brian King and I, along with Sergeant Randy Piper, went out to the Crescent School District, totally unrelated to what the sheriff's doing, and talked with the educators out there about target hardening the Crescent School, because Lord knows they're pretty remote. It's going to be a while before they're going to see law enforcement, unless they're really lucky having a deputy close by, should such an event happen. So we work very closely together along with our mental health services and other organizations throughout the county when certain things pop up. So what can the citizenry do? Well, the first thing is don't take anything for granted. We're going to ask you that if you see it, report it. If it's an unusual person hanging around at a school or any place that you just don't feel right about, believe me, deputies and police officers don't mind getting those calls. Those are easy calls. And we can go talk to these individuals and ascertain whether this person is actually a threat to the school or Walmart or Safeway or whatever the situation may be. But it's a first step in helping us find these folks and talk to these folks and make sure that we're all safe. So the more information that you can give us when you do make that call through dispatch, it helps us identify that situation even better. When we do respond to a scene like that, we won't just talk to that individual, but we may talk to others around them and try to learn more about that individual. It may be somebody we know, and it may be a situation where we want to develop more information so that we can respond accordingly. Has this person committed a crime? Has this person a need to go see Wendy or Peninsula Behavioral Health? We'll make those determinations and work from there. The question was asked in the handout, and I'm not sure exactly why, but I was asked to respond to, is the notifying person informed about the actions or inaction related to the report? And yes, we can get in touch if the reporting party wants to be contacted by law enforcement after reporting such an event. Certainly we'll call them back and talk to them and explain to them what happened or what didn't happen and the reasons for that. So I already mentioned how closely we work together with each other in helping our schools. That's vitally important for all of us. Let's see. So the next section is what can be done to protect citizens from gun events? Well, past illegal activities, there are numerous things that we can respond to, and everything is situational. And we can sit here tonight and play what ifs. You know, well, what if this, what if that? So if the person does have a history of issues in their background, there are several mechanisms that can be put in place, particularly here in Washington State, that can prohibit them from having a handgun. Any conviction for a domestic violence situation will prohibit them from having a weapon. The other thing is recently the domestic violence protection order was expanded to include what's called extreme risk protection orders. And that will actually give us a new mechanism by law to help relieve somebody of their firearms should we be concerned about their activities or their thoughts and things like that. Now that's quite an element to prove, but that is a mechanism that has already shown to be helpful here in Clallam County. We have used it once or twice in the county already, and that's a fairly new law that's been put into place. Of course, we know that Washington State has the new gun transfer law, which requires complete background just to transfer a weapon. And of course, concealed weapons permits also require extensive background requirements, which include a criminal history check and a mental health check. So that's all done through either Port Angeles Police Department or wherever you live, whatever police department you live in, or at the sheriff's office. Those can take place. So we do have action plans that we have developed. This is part of why we do the school events that we were talking about, is to help develop those plans. As I told you, we stopped by Crescent School today to talk to them about their plans and stuff. And I got to tell you folks, I was quite impressed on the steps that they had taken for preparedness out there. They did a really good job. You know, they've got it written out, a pre-planned lockdown, if that's what direction they want to go, or escape plan, so to speak. You know, if they can have the opportunity to take the kids and run away from the shooter. They've done a very good job in isolating that, and each classroom has got this plan in the book for the teacher to respond to. And boy, it prompted some real intelligent questions from those educators so that they can fine-tune that stuff. In the future, I have tasked Sergeant Pieper, who is kind of my firearms lead and my use of force lead, to develop small mini drills rather than the big drill I was telling you about that we plan for a year and have everybody and their dog responding and exercise that. But maybe small mini drills like similar to a fire drill, where we just go in there for just a little while and practice their procedures with working with us as law enforcement, and maybe have an actor in there and stuff so that we can apply that plan specifically to that school. Because each school is different. I was talking to Mr. Cobb before we started. Look at the high school. I mean, and the college, those two are nightmares for something like that. But then you have other schools like Franklin, or you know, like Crescent itself is built like an old strip mall. It's got doors on the outside, so that we're going to react to that one differently than we would, say, to the high school. So, okay, I'm getting flagged. I got 2 minutes, so if there's anybody that has any questions for me, I'll be glad to.
Well, why don't we save the questions for last? You don't have to take the full 10 minutes if you feel comfortable with what you've done, and I'm sure there'll be some questions as we go down.
Good. Like I say, it's tough to be first.
There you go. Okay, Wendy, you're up. Let's move the microphone over for you. There you go.
Good evening. My name is Wendy Sisk, and I'm the CEO of Peninsula Behavioral Health. I've been in this community for a little over 15 years now, predominantly prior to working in administration, providing crisis intervention services to this community for well over a decade. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the risk factors that we're addressing in the community, or we're partnering with other agencies on at this time. And certainly the issue of gun violence has been in the news media, and I want folks to know that anytime a student makes a threat at a school, that student's not allowed to return until they've had an intensive evaluation by one of our trained crisis staff, who is trained in determining imminent risk. And we then provide a feedback back to the school about whether or not we see imminent risk and what the plan of action is at that point. We also work closely with law enforcement. We are part of that mental health check when somebody's trying to get firearms back out of evidence. We work closely with the Sheriff's Department on that on a really regular basis. And we have an opportunity to do a check above and beyond what the state does naturally to see if we have any other information that will contribute to whether or not someone can or cannot have a firearm. We're also involved in lots of other things. One of the things that we know is that since 2015, we've seen about a 43% increase in the number of people requesting mental health care in our community. So we have a lot of people in our community that I believe were really suffering for many years in silence. And once more individuals were able to access health care after the Affordable Care Act, we've seen more and more people coming for help. At the same time, we've seen a substantial increase in our number of acute crisis contacts. In about 2013, I think we had about 3,000 crisis contacts, and last year we had about 6,000 crisis contacts with members of our community. Last year, we were able to provide support to over 3,000 Clallam County community members. People think of Peninsula Behavioral Health, I think, mostly as the outpatient mental health center. We have a strong crisis presence. We have a strong presence in the emergency room, in the jail, in juvenile detention, and it's sometimes in our schools. We try to work really, really closely with our community partners to try to make sure that needs are being met. And when someone has a mental health issue and they're making threats of harming themselves, harming someone else, it's generally our crisis team that gets involved and makes a determination about whether or not that person is safe to be in the community. And reiterating what Mr. Cameron said, it's really important if you see a significant change, if you have concerns, if somebody makes a threat, that you report that to someone, whether that's calling us at mental health, whether that's calling 911 and reporting to law enforcement. But oftentimes we know that individuals who are really struggling and are at high risk of engaging in those sorts of behaviors tell people. They let people know that they're hurting, they let people know that they're angry, they let people know that they're having thoughts of doing bad things. And it's never a bad thing to call and report that. It can be challenging on relationships for a short period of time, but the long-term investment is very important. One of the other areas that our community is really struggling with is with opiate use disorder and drug overdose. So Peninsula Behavioral Health has been involved in a 3-county opiate response project. We are working with our partners who are providing medication-assisted treatment. We have homeless outreach staff that are reaching out who have mental health or substance use disorder problems and really trying to focus in on those people who are at highest risk of overdose. We're working closely with Clallam County Health Department as well. People have really strong feelings about syringe exchange, and I'm not sure that we want to talk about that tonight, but that is a safety issue for our community. And for every syringe that's exchanged is a syringe that's not going to be found in our parks or on our streets. We're certainly always involved when we've had someone in our community who has had a suicide attempt. Again, our crisis services responds to hundreds of calls a year related to suicide, suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, and we see people on a routine basis. We're providing care to a number of people who are struggling with those sorts of thoughts on an ongoing basis. So we try to be creative in our intervention. Our job is, whenever possible, to provide care in the community, but we are also the organization in the community that has the authority to mandate treatment through the Involuntary Treatment Act. And we do probably about 250 to 350 involuntary commitment evaluations a year in our county. And we're always looking at what the law allows us to do and trying to encourage people to make the best choices for themselves. Unfortunately, sometimes we're not able to provide the outcome that loved ones or even the individual would prefer, because once we get involved in that involuntary treatment process, it becomes a legal matter as much as a clinical matter. The other thing that we're doing at this point is we're really rapidly expanding our children's services. And we're providing a much more intensive wraparound service for young people who are struggling, who are engaged in multiple systems, young people who have had adverse childhood experiences, or are just overall struggling with mental health and the challenges that life puts in front of us right now. I will admit I didn't actually get the list of what folks wanted us to talk about tonight prior to this meeting, so I don't have anything more prepared to share at this point, but I look forward to answering questions down the line.
Thank you, Wendy.
Hi, Hi, I'm Marc Jackson. I'm the superintendent here in Port Angeles, and I've been superintendent in Port Angeles for 4 years. I've been in education for 42 years, and I am retiring in June, not because of this subject, but I feel that this is a subject that is very dear to me. I was a member of and am a member of the AASA, which is the National Superintendents Group. And we spent a lot of time on Sandy Hook when that tragic event took place. And we were looking at these very high-powered rifles and magazines and wondering, why does this continue to happen? And what can we do about defending our teachers and our students in situations like that? Can it be possible? Like you, this is a subject that we all stand on our heads and try to figure out why these things continue to happen in our schools, in our malls, and with such regularity. So as superintendents, we try to look at legislation, gun legislation, and at least ban the high-powered magazines from schools. And we couldn't do it as superintendents because of the regions across the United States. At that time it was Alaska and it was Idaho, that our colleagues did not wish to address just some basic assumptions about gun legislation. And it's hard when the parents from one of the youngsters that died at Sandy Hook is a first grader, and the parents come into the room and they barely can talk and their voice is cracking, and then it's too late. And for those parents, their lives have changed, just as the 17 individuals in Florida have changed. And we will go on and we'll do what we have to do, but think about the pain and the suffering in those families when what they were doing is just thinking that they were going to drop their children off for school, and by the end of that day they were making funeral arrangements for their loved ones. So in the field of education, we feel that the students and the teachers are targets under a certain set of circumstances. And we have a duty and a responsibility to drill and work with our local officials, and it's already been voiced tonight, the fact that we do work together, and we do. It's an ongoing event that requires a lot of training because our students are constantly changing through the course of their 12 years with us in public education. It's a lot more serious now. There's a tendency to focus on knowing exactly what to do, where to go, how does this work, and the rules have changed. I mean, at one point if there was an activity and it was taking place in the office and you were further from that event, some of the strategies have changed. And we keep a lot of the strategies and a lot of the educational things that we've learned from law enforcement with ourselves, because some of these individuals, as the one in Florida did do, knew what was going to happen by pulling the alarm and knowing where the students were going, and sat there and waited for them and shot them. So we can't share, we can't put this on the internet. We watch very carefully who's on our safety committees, because in some cases we need to know who we're talking with and why. So that whole scene has changed, and it's become a topic that's dear to all of us because of the seriousness of it, and because of the high-powered magazines that are out there in our country. And today, I found it just absolutely amazing that when I was at the high school, I attended a rally, and it was calm, it was educational, there was a lot of courage there with our kids, but they're just as concerned as anyone else, and it's their colleagues. It's their teachers. And I know that as a superintendent, we spend an inordinate amount of time recruiting and going on and getting the people who want to reach and teach our youngsters. And we invest in them because we believe that in many cases, because Port Angeles has such a wonderful educational program, we get people that not just stay with us 2-3 years, but stay their entire career with us. So they're family to us, and they're very important to us in the way that they talk to our kids, the way they build partnerships with our parents is of the utmost importance to us, because we know how much work that takes as we move from not just school to school, but from topic to topic, from grade by grade, classroom by classroom, seat by seat. It's an investment in youth, so we watch closely. And we know that there are signs and there are pressures that all of our youngsters go through, and we watch them closely. It could be in poetry, it could be in paintings, it could be in how kids are making friends. Behind the scenes, we have teachers and counselors and professionals that spend an inordinate amount of time watching and making sure, are we paying attention to anything that would be a red flag to us, that would allow us the opportunity to talk with our parents, to talk with our youngsters, and to thwart off any type of a threat or something that would be bothering them, that they would be carrying inside of them. And it happens a lot, because students and parents are doing the very best that they can do. They're struggling to cope with the demands of growing up in an aggressive society, and that's not changing. It's getting very intense. So there's a lot of concerns on their plate, and there's a lot of concerns on your plate, and those pressures build up over time, and it's already been echoed how important it is to pay attention to this, to listen to what kids are saying, to hear the tone in their voices. And no one knows this better than parents and guardians about what's going on in their lives. So sometimes we feel that we're really right in touch with them, and we're not. So it's an unpredictable science. We lost a youngster at the beginning of the school year, and she was doing very well. But our guidance services at the high school, when that girl jumped off the bridge, spent the next 2.5 to 3 weeks around the clock talking, discussing, working with youngsters, because it's not over, because they want them to know that where did we go wrong, what do we need to do more of, and on and on and on. So there's my signal, and okay, 2 minutes. Let me wrap this up by saying that we have guidance services at all of our institutions, from the elementary all the way to the high school. That's unusual. Normally you don't have counselors in elementary school. We do. We have the AmeriCorps counselors that we brought in, so there's an additional 12 to 14 spread throughout our school system. And I think that what's important for me as a superintendent is that this school system is really dialed in to not just talking with youngsters, but connecting with them. And that is becoming so relevant. And I appreciate the fact that the kids today turned around and thanked the administrators, thanked the adults for being there and paying attention to them. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to one of the students who did a fine job today.
Thank you, Marc.
So first of all, I would like to thank Cope Indivisible and specifically Betsy Robbins for inviting me as a student member of this panel. As a student, I don't have a professional perspective, but I think that I have a unique perspective. So hello, my name is Emily Menchu, and I'm a senior at Port Angeles High School. I'm 17 years old, and I'm already registered to vote in the next election. That has prompted me to have an interest in being active and standing up for my beliefs. Many issues concern me and require my active participation and attention. Tonight's Community Safety Awareness Forum has significant meaning to me as today marks 1 month since the tragic school shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School career. I was born a year after the Columbine High School tragedy, which happened to be the catalyst for school lockdown drills that I have been a part of many of those, and now they are sometimes referred to as active shooter drills. The students in Parkland have truly turned their pain into activism, which inspired me and my peers to do the same. The walkout today is a good example of that. We had our main focus being on remembering those victims and having national unity and feeling that pain together and mourning that loss. Our high school campus has not only outlived some of its purpose, but the layout is not effectively able to be secured in a lockdown. However, school campuses are not our only concern. We want to ensure the safeties of ourselves and future families at any public venues. In addition to physical safety, accessible mental and emotional support should be available to each and every student and community member. And I know that we are all here for the same purpose and we all have the same concerns. And so thank you again for having me and for all being here.
So that's a real tough act to follow, so we'll see how we can do. So, hi everybody, I'm Brian Smith, I'm the police chief, and I want to echo what everybody said. I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this conversation with you all. So the perspective on safety. You know, Port Angeles and Clallam counties are very safe communities. Events that have happened far from here don't change that. They could influence some people's behavior, but we're still living in a very, very safe community. It doesn't mean that we're not challenged by circumstances like you've heard, and you know, we've evolved in my 37 years of being in law enforcement. I would say mostly in a good way in how we address things like this. Like what we're doing right now, our day-to-day practice in law enforcement is much more collaborative with other professions. And, you know, a couple of examples of emerging trends for us is embedding social workers and treatment people in with law enforcement, and that's an active effort that we're part of in this community. And the idea being that, you know, community caretaking is really part of all of our jobs, and you know, preventing things and dealing with situations and bad circumstances when we're upstream is much better and much easier than when it's a circumstance that we're reacting to. And obviously, the extreme circumstances is what gets our attention. In 2013, in January, the Sheriff's Department and PAPD convened. I would call it a summit. Wouldn't that be right, Ron? We brought every educator that we could get to show up to City Council chambers in January of 2013, and Sandy Hook was the reason we did it. And we filled the place up, and we didn't really know where we were going to go with this conversation, but we wanted to get everybody in the room with us to have them to see where they were at and see if they were willing to work with us. So that's 5 years ago, and unfortunately bad things have happened in the world, but a lot of things have changed here and across in terms of how we operate. After a recent event in Florida, we met with high school staff, and I was reminded about how much things have changed in a good way in terms of preparation and thinking about all the things that people individually control. And like Marc said, some of the things we've done differently we don't publicly talk about. But where we started 5 years ago, Under Sheriff Ron Peregrine, Chief Criminal Deputy Ron Cameron at the time, me and a few others, we asked for permission from the Port Angeles School District. We would like your staff for an hour and a half, everybody that works for you. And the school district was very accommodating, gave us the late starter release, and in a period of 2 years, we talked with and did a presentation that we came up with, and really Ron Peregrine had a lot to do with creating the presentation, but they were 2 to 3 hour sessions with everybody that worked for the school district on, I would say, inside information from us. You know, it was the beginning of the run, hide, fight, but it was also the beginning of us talking to people who are, like Marc said, in difficult situations of, you know, educating kids and also being their protectors, about thinking about their role and their situation a little differently. Well, from a lot of those efforts, I mean, I noticed the change in the school district here, small things, big things, and how they view their role. And like, I'm a parent of a 7th grader, and she goes to Stevens School, and I wouldn't necessarily be a parent of a kid going to school here if I didn't perceive the school district as very, with the staff, very receptive and very proactive and very forward-thinking in working with us. The process of talking to people about a really, really difficult, dark subject, and Ron and I, we went out to Clown Bay together and presented out there. You know, you either focus on the things you control or you focus on the things you don't control. In a lot of these circumstances, we control a lot more things than we think. And it's important, you know, in law enforcement that we offer that opportunity for people to view their world differently. A lot of challenges with how schools are designed, a lot of challenges with many things. But this is an evolution, and our tools in our toolbox, like Ron said, have changed. The Extreme Risk Protection Order, which is, I guess you would call it the red flag law, PAPD's done 3 of those interventions. They all come from information from somebody. And that's a circumstance where someone, and you read about this, but you know, it's really a powerful tool for us. We have the ability to temporarily restrict someone's access to firearms. In other words, we're removing their gun rights for a period of a year based on facts and based on an order from a judge. And there's a list of things, like recent acts and threats of violence, evidence of firearms. There's like 9 things, but to be successful in this effort, it would all come from things that we got from you, from somebody in the community, from a family member, and it's a tool we didn't have before, but we've done it 3 times. You know, it's March, and you know, those are situations where we can't measure something that didn't happen, but we're really we think it's an important, you know, addition to the things we can do. I think the outreach process that we're going to be doing will continue with us and school staff, and that'll be an evolution. The training that we do, and Ron and I have been a big part of this in preparing different organizations for, we call them unusual events. The college, the Coho. I think we've done our outreach program, county, city government. We deliver it to businesses all the time. And a lot of times it's really for them to view unusual events, things that would probably be best, you're just going to prepare for something that's never going to happen. And I want to make sure we keep the context. I mean, I take this subject really seriously. I'm a dad of a 7th grader, but I also have bullets in my firearm, right? And those bullets have been with me, not the same ones, but with me for 37 years. Most of us won't ever actually use them, but we need them and we carry them. And, you know, preparing yourself for something really bad doesn't mean the world's coming to an end. It just means you're preparing yourself for something that's a possibility. One of the messages the teachers seemed to receive well was, you know, there's possibilities and there's probabilities. Living in this community, regardless of all the things that are going on across the world and the U.S., the probability of being victimized by violence here is very, very remote. And like our violence statistics in Clallam County, Port Angeles, violence occurs predominantly amongst people that know each other, have a relationship. So like these school events, we'll call them stranger violence. That's just the fact. That's the probability, very, very low. But often it's helpful to prepare yourself for the possibility of something happening.
So it doesn't mean that our world's going dark because we're here talking about this. It means we're talking about a possibility of something. And analogy that I learned from the former undersheriff, because he's really good at this stuff, and when we would talk together, usually if I didn't start first, I wouldn't get to say anything, because Ron loves to talk. But I learned a lot of good things from him. And one was the life jacket analogy. Again, and I want to bring it back to this subject. If you're on a boat and you've got a life jacket on, and somebody says, you've got 1 minute and you're going overboard, you're going to go in the water, I'm sorry, but that's what's going to happen. Your survival rate goes up dramatically from you get swept over and you're in the water. You get the same life jacket, same water, same temperature. So the idea of preparing yourself mentally, physically, whatever, for unusual events, it doesn't mean the world's coming to an end, but it is helpful and it can benefit you in many ways. And looking forward to more questions and conversations about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Betsy, who really had the idea to present this community conversation, and then also to thank each and every one of you who jumped on board pretty quickly in a very short time period. And I'm glad everybody else is here too, because it gives us potential resources to keep working together to help our community be safer and to help our children grow up to be good citizens and healthy. I'm Ellen Fetchiet, and I have been a licensed mental health provider since 1978. I continue in a small private practice at this moment, although I like working on teams much better than doing what I'm doing. And so I wanted to mention, I have worked in 4 states, always in mental health systems and then in schools, hit and miss here and there. What I really want to emphasize is some of the dramatic changes that have happened over time because of, actually I have like 3 or 4 things, hopefully I can keep my act together here enough to get them up. But what's happened as a result of the climate outside of our town, and what happens in our state and in the federal government to make education safer, help us have police, help us have public servants. And the funding source is what I'm always struck by and have been increasingly concerned about over the years. We give some money, meaning the legislature or the federal government appropriates money for our needs, or for our public safety and schools, which are our most important resources, really. And then it disappears, particularly in mental health. That's what I've seen over the years. And that doesn't help us address the social problems that have been here for a long time. In my very first job, I was dealing with heroin use. So that was in the 60s, 70s. And then many of the same problems are happening over and over again, and we all know here, at least the problems we have here with opioids and the domestic violence and other things. So that's something I'd like everybody to think about. So that's a big issue, and become better informed about who makes those decisions. Look carefully at what the laws are and make sure and vote. And that was very exciting to hear you signed up, and I hope you get everybody else signed up at the right time. And there's a lot of people around who will help you, because it's clear from what we've all seen recently, younger people are paying better attention to how things work and how do we all survive. And healthcare is one of our major, major stressors, and will continue to be, I'm afraid, unless we all join hands. Okay, so that's kind of that side. The other is prevention. What we're not doing in a systematic way is preventing, and we know a lot about what we need to do. We do some evidence-based practices now in all of our professions. However, we don't systematically look at the risks that exist. And the University of Washington has researchers who for many years have been looking at the risk and protective factors in communities. And that's one of the things I think we need to do more systematically again. A few years ago, a few people here in the audience were with me on the Healthy Youth Coalition, which came into being because we had federal money here to address the tobacco problems, but really to try to prevent drug and alcohol problems in youth. We need to kind of take what we learned back then, and I see Jamie in the crowd. She knows this stuff like anybody, and we need to use her as a resource. She can answer questions more specifically about that to help us all as we go forward. What we're seeing a lot of throughout this country is an increase in trauma. And the trauma that I see and worry about a whole lot now is we're having increased exposure to toxic stress. When we see these shootings, we see it talked about on TV. I'm very concerned about the first responders and wanting to advocate that we all pay attention to it costs money to protect the first responders who take care of all of us and to do everything else that we need to do. So I think that's pretty much what I want to say at this point, except to mention there's 2 trainings coming up. One on March 23rd, where Marion Birch is going to be at the hospital talking about NEAR, which is neuroepigenetics, adverse childhood experiences, and resilience. And that is a free training thanks to the school district and the other resources we've put together. And it's open to anyone. It'll be 3 to 6 on the 23rd. Prevention Works has flyers, and everybody should sign up for Prevention Works. Jamie, do we have any of that here?
We don't, but I'll share the website later.
Perfect. So Jamie will give some information. The next one is coming up on the 27th, and I have a few flyers, and again, this will be publicized more, and this is a pretty big deal. And I see that Brian's going to be there, and our Port Angeles mayor, and a psychiatric consultant who I assume is Dr. Jones, who's over at the hospital now, someone from the Department of Health, and a prosecutor. So it's a town hall meeting, Hope, Health, and Strength. So we have some flyers. We'll leave them for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. We can probably, here, I'll get the other.
Oh. This is.
Good evening. My name's Ken. I'm the fire chief here in Port Angeles, and I'm glad to be here. It's a pleasure to be here. I was just thinking, I was listening about how difficult it must be to be in high school now,
Yes.
or to be, you know, I mean, it must be tough to be dealing with these things. And then I was thinking back, when I was in grammar school, we used to have civil defense drills. Did you guys ever remember that? Where you used to hide under your desk because the atom bomb was going to drop? How silly that was. And, you know, it just, but I can't imagine what it would be like now to have to be worried about things. We were worried then about things that were just so kind of abstract, you know. There was just abstract thought about nuclear war, you know, something, but it was just a kind of a thing. But now to be a kid in school and to be actually seeing things on the news that are actually happening must be an incredibly difficult thing to deal with. I can't imagine what that's like, and it's tough. It's interesting, several other folks here have been talking about risk. That's my job, is risk management, is dealing with risk, is looking at the various risks that the community faces, and then being able to somehow apportion very limited resources to dealing with very significant risks of very varying types. So I was just in a meeting this afternoon. We were talking about earthquakes, we were talking about natural disasters, talking about all those different things, these sort of risks that are out there. We have plans and we have responses to all these sorts of risks. Well, the violence in schools, the violence that we see around the world, that's another one of those risks that we have to deal with. It's another one of those risks that we basically apportion resources to. So we work real closely with the police department. We train with them, we work with them. We have plans for how we would respond to an incident like this if in fact it did occur. The way that I look at it is that when we're planning for any sort of an event like this, it would be no different than, you know, if there was a bus crash, or if there was something that were a whole lot of patients, we're going to deal with it the same way. So when we train with the police for incidents in the schools, we're basically using the same skills we'd be using every day for any other sort of an incident. So for us, from a training perspective, it's a good thing. It's something that we try to get down. From a fire marshal's perspective, this is a very difficult situation because my primary concern is getting people out of places. And so now, you know, we're in a whole sort of different paradigm now where we're talking about locking people into places and keeping people out of places. And it's almost a completely different way of looking at the world. And you know, we've seen examples of, and someone mentioned earlier about how, you know, someone would pull an alarm knowing that this is where the students are going to go. Or if they evacuate a federal building, by pulling an alarm, this is where the employees are going to go. So it forces us to have a completely different mindset about how we look at the world, how we prepare for the world, how we teach people how to protect themselves from incidents. I mean, the likelihood, again, Brian talked about risk. Just because we're talking about this doesn't mean it's likely to happen, but we need to deal with it. So for me, from a risk standpoint, you know, the chances of fire in a building, the chances of an earthquake are significantly greater than any sort of a violent issue. And so for me, my perspective is, I want to train people how to get out. But now instead of that, we also have to say, okay, well, this is how you train to get out, but at the same time, you maybe need to mix it up so you don't always do the same thing every time. So completely different way of having to look at the world, and completely different challenges for educators, whereas it used to be the fire drill was such a simple thing. You'd line up against this wall, you go out this door, you turn right, you go here, you go there, you all sit out in the playground, and this is what you do. Well, now it's like, well, we don't always want to do that. Maybe we want to mix it up. So someone doesn't know exactly how we're going to act or exactly what we're going to do. All just real interesting sort of, I don't know, sort of just interesting ways of looking at the world. The other thing from an anecdotal, well, police and fire have become, over my career in the last 10, 15 years, we've become more of a social safety net than we ever were before. It used to be, for us, our job was reacting to incidents that were not as much predictable, but were typical, I'd say. And over time now, our jobs have changed very significantly to where if no one else knows what to do or who to call, they dial 911. And so then fire and police become those first responder safety net for the people who don't know what else to do. And it has become, again, this is only anecdotal from my experiences, that, and Brian could probably back this up, over the last 10 years, a huge increase in the number of those calls are dealing with substance abuse issues, mental health issues, and societal issues, as opposed to what typically were fires or break-ins or, you know, the typical things that you would think that fire and police are dealing with. And so when I'm looking to hire people, I'm not looking for the big, strong guys who are going to run into burning buildings. You know, we're looking for people that can show compassion, that can show care, that can show that they care about the community and the people they're dealing with, because that's what they're dealing with most of the time. It's not that typical, stereotypical running around with an axe and spraying water on stuff. It's compassionately dealing with people who are at a really difficult time in their life. So just thinking about that from the school's perspective, you know, it's the same thing. You know, we're looking at, you know, we have to change the way we think, and we have to change the way we act, because the risk is different now than it used to be. It's a very interesting sort of a dynamic thing. The other thing too is that I would just end by saying that from my perspective, there aren't any magic bullets. There's no one right answer. There's no one thing that's going to solve this. But what will make a difference, if I could make the parallel to emergency management, if the big earthquake happens right now,
and you expect the fire department to come over the hill and save you, it's not going to happen. It's just not. We're going to be overwhelmed in the first couple of minutes. What we need is for you to be able to take care of yourselves. We need you to be prepared. We need you to be thinking. We need you to be aware of what the risks are. We need you to be thinking about them. You don't have to be worried about them. You don't have to be stressed about them, but you at least need to be thinking about them. And this is sort of the same thing. We, educators can't do it all. Police can't do it all. Fire can't do it all. The mental health professionals can't do it all. Really, it's the individuals being aware and being conscious of what's going on, looking around, reporting, like I said earlier, stuff that just doesn't quite look right. If it doesn't quite look right or feel right, it probably isn't. And just say something. And just don't be the person who just says, well, somebody else will. Just stand up and say something, and don't worry about being embarrassed about it. If I could take 1 second, I'll tell you one quick story. So here's the thing. So they did this experiment a long time ago where they put 4 people into a room, and 3 of them knew what the experiment was and 1 of them didn't. And so the 3 of them, the 4 people were told they were going to sit and do a puzzle in this room. There were a bunch of cameras looking in a little room, and 3 of the 4 of them were in on it, and 1 of them wasn't. They said, okay, work on this puzzle. So they're all working on this puzzle and happily chatting away, and some smoke started to come underneath the door to the room. And they're all still just doing the puzzle, and the cameras are watching, and the guy who wasn't in on this experiment looked down and saw the smoke, but I don't like this, but kept doing the puzzle. And the other 3 knew that the smoke was going to be coming in, so they just ignored it. So they kept working on the puzzle, and more smoke came in, and more smoke came in, and they're all just looking at this. And the guy is looking at it, he's going like this, and finally, the smoke got so thick that the cameras can't even see the 4 people in the room anymore. So they stop the experiment, and they say to the one guy, they go, did you see the smoke? He goes, yeah. They go, why didn't you say anything? And he goes, well, nobody else did. So don't be that person. You know, if you see something, if you notice something, we're all bright, smart people. You know your friends, you know your neighbors, you know your acquaintances, you know what they normally are like. If something changes, something's different, just say something. That's where, in my lay opinion, is what's going to make the difference. So that's all I got.
Thank you very much, Ken. Thank you all for Now we've got time to take questions from the audience. If you want to step over to the microphone so everybody can hear your question, and you can address your question to any one of the individuals, or if you don't know who specifically should respond, one of our panelists, I'm sure, will jump in on it. So, all right.
Students first.
Yeah, students. Any students who would like to go first, or just anybody. I think we've got a small enough group. Everybody should have a chance to ask a question if they have a chance.
My name is Denise Mackenstadt, and first off, I'd like to say that I have family members who are clients of Peninsula Behavioral Health, and they've done a really nice job, and I really appreciate the work you're doing. One of the things that we talked about mental health, and we talked about students, there is a huge stigma to having any kind of mental health issues, and particularly among students. So how do we work with students to understand that get help, and it will still be kept private, it still will be addressed, but it's not going to be broadcasted so that you're having to deal with this stigma.
Jeff can probably jump in here too. Stigma is a long battle, right? So whether we're talking about stigma associated with mental health issues or stigma associated with substance use disorders, and even stigma related to health issues can be a challenge for folks. What I will say about that is I think we've made a lot of strides. We've had a lot of public figures in recent years come out and talk about their mental health problems. I had the fortunate opportunity to see Ashley Judd speak about her mental health struggles. I think the more we expose our children from a young age to the fact that it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to talk to somebody when you're not okay, that's how we continue to push back on that battle. I know that our schools are right time, and it's tough because sometimes there are stronger issues around stigma with certain families, with certain generations, and I think we've made huge strides forward. And I think the best thing that we can do is continue to talk about it really, really openly. And again, I mentioned earlier that we've seen a huge jump in the number of people accessing care in the last few years. And I think that's twofold. One is people had access to healthcare who hadn't had access to healthcare in a long, long time or ever. And the second thing is we're talking about mental health more frequently. We're talking about substance use disorders much more openly than we did in generations gone by. And as a result of that, we see that individuals are much more likely to come forward and let us know that they need assistance. But we still have a long ways to go.
Well, confidentiality is a big thing in the public education system because we can't just talk with students, especially if we're going to recommend treatment. But I agree that the new normal is for us to just knock these barriers down, these walls down that stop us from talking with one another. And it actually feels good to be healthy. Being safe is not just being physically safe. Being safe is also knowing that you can know that the adults in the room are thinking and asking and talking about you all the time. At Hamilton, I'll use Hamilton because you don't know this, but very quickly they're going to be winning this national award. I shouldn't be saying this, but I got to do it because it goes off the charts as far as youngsters and parents getting within so many feet of a school where the energy level is just so incredibly high. And it doesn't matter if you're a teacher or a custodian or the superintendent, or everyone over there is playing a role, worried and talking and breaking down anything that would stop them from knowing that they care about you or that they're going to work with you. And it's kind of magical how they do this. But everyone on that staff, and it's not just at Hamilton, although they're being recognized for the wonderful work that they do. And I noticed that it's catching kids doing a lot of things right. And Gary, the principal, will sit in the hallway and he'll watch kids walk down the hallway and he'll stop and he'll talk to the student and he'll say, come over here, I just want to thank you. For what? Well, I saw what you did. What did you do? I saw that you went up to your friend who left their books at lunch. You went out of your way to bring them back and put them in the room so they had their books because they were going to be looking for them quickly. And you weren't even waiting to get recognized for the fact that you did that. Why did you do that? Because I really care about my friend. So there's this sense that at that school, there's a oneness, and it's a wonderful sense that when they get to these problems, it's a little bit easier to deal with them in a subtle way. So I agree. We've got a long ways to go on this one, especially the older the kids get, they're a little bit more sophisticated and they keep things from you, they keep things from their parents. And we've got to find a way to continue to know one another a little bit better.
Thank you, Marc.
Could we get Emily's feedback on how she feels about stigma in the high school?
Sure.
In the high school specifically?
Well, just kind of, I mean, you're getting it from all us old people. I'd love to know from your point of view what we could do differently.
Well, I think if you're gonna, just to specifically speak about the stigma around mental health, I think that a lot of that can be avoided if it's dealt with at a young age. I think that kids, when they are younger, when they're elementary school age, are easier to be then shaped in the way that they treat others. Excuse me. But, and I don't think it's a lost cause for high schoolers at all. I think that high schoolers, middle schoolers are definitely able to be shaped as well. But I think that young children tend to be more accepting in their nature. So I think if you make mental health or just even talking about feelings and not wanting to hide that more of a normal thing throughout elementary school, then I think that that can change a lot of things because then that's the next generation of people. But specifically about stigma at the high school, I have to say that I think that it is, well, it's really impressive how little there is. I go to student council meetings, and there are people that are wanting to start clubs that are just a club to help girls with their self-esteem, or a club to just talk to people about feelings. And I just think that that's really cool that the students are recognizing those issues, and the students are taking it then upon themselves to start those clubs or have those conversations. So I really think that it is changing, and I think that we have a good high school atmosphere and a very accepting high school atmosphere. So I think we're really lucky in this community for that.
Thank you, Emily. Okay, next question.
Hi, my name is Herman Ellis. First of all, I'd like to say that I'm very impressed with the panel and their preparation for any particular event that might occur. I know that this is supposed to be and is the safe part of the United States until something happens. I don't think that the communities in Florida or in Connecticut and all the other places thought of themselves as unsafe places either. Your concern covers a lot of things. I'd like to hone in on assault weapons. The discourse in news media is either fortress school or bunker school. In other words, have a good guy with a gun to take care of the bad guy with a gun, or find a cubby hole to hide. I do think that we need to be more proactive in that respect and try to involve the political forces that make these decisions, whether we are safe or not.
Do you have a question?
Yes.
Okay.
The Supreme Court ruled on the Second Amendment, declared it okay, but it also ruled that government can put limitations on how and what and where weapons can be used. They did not put the limitations out, they just declared that government can do it. My question is, can the state or the county or the city establish some form of regulatory shield that will prevent the use of assault weapons in our community?
Thank you. Ron, do you want to tackle that first?
I'd like to, except that, you know, as we are well aware, there's three branches of government, and I work in the enforcement branch or the executive branch. It's not in my purview to create laws, it's in my purview to enforce them. So until such times as such laws are brought to, you know, to bear for us to enforce, that's my, and that's what I need to do. So, you know, that's my response to that.
I did not intend to imply that either the police department or the fire department or the school superintendent should take any such action.
Mm-hmm.
But the state government, for instance, could formulate such a rule. It might be challenged if it would go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court already has ruled that such limitations are within the rights or within the restrictions of the Second Amendment. So I think one of the things that needs to be done is that political pressure as a community has to be applied through our representatives to the federal government and the state government.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for your participation.
My name, I don't think this is on, but anyway. Is it? Okay. Well, so my name is Norma Turner. I wanted to do a quick follow-up to his question about assault weapons. We probably need more public education that the court actually found a few months ago Assault weapons are not protected by the Second Amendment.
All right. Yeah.
So we need to make sure that all of our elected officials know that factoid. But I would like to say, one of the most common paradigms or analogies they use in prevention, when Ellen was talking about prevention, is that people are standing by the river and these kids are floating by and they keep dragging the kids out and saving them, and finally somebody says, maybe we should go upstream and find out why the kids are going and piling in the river. So they go upstream and find out they need a fence at the playground. So I think as a community we need to go upstream, and as he said, instead of having bunker mentalities, we need to say what can be proactive. And one of the suggestions is that we've already seen some leadership out of private enterprise, so that Dick's Sporting Goods and Walmart refuses to carry assault weapons. I think we as a community should say to every gun shop in Clown County, you should follow the same and not even sell assault.
My name is Spring Thomas, and I've been an educator for 40 years. I'm new to this community, and I want to thank all of you, and for those of you here. What's so interesting in the Western world is we talk a lot. I've recently come from a country where I spent 9 years, and what I did there was something called a children's art experience. And what I learned brilliantly was how important it is for all of us, and especially our children, to express themselves. And you can do it in a varied way through art medium. For example, I really look forward to providing cameras for high school kids. A program that I saw work really well was A Day in My Life. And high school students photographed whatever they wanted. They also journaled their feelings. Then we had an exhibition. No one needed to read the journal. No one needed to see captions under 8x10 photographs. That we worked with them and taught them how to crop, how to tell a story by their series of photographs. It's powerful. It's really, really good stuff. Journaling is really important. Doing art.
Do you have a question for our panel?
I'd like to know where there is funding available, if it's through possibly the school. I know that art programs are cut back. It's all over our country, that's what happens. And I'm so glad to see music is so brilliant here, because it does give expression, and it's fabulous, okay? But I know that visual art is another way. Not everybody is able to express themselves through music.
Well, let's see if Marc has a comment about that.
Well, you are in an artist community, okay, so that's not going away. We do have fine arts, we have performing arts, and it's exemplary. So that's well funded. I believe that, and we have it across the board, from the elementary schools all the way to the high school. We are concerned about our funding streams over the next year and a half, because we've passed a levy at 9.1 million per year last year, and now that formula is changing, and we're going to go from $3.23 per 1,000 down to $1.50, and it's going to hit us unless the legislature is moving in a direction to stop that. So we're bracing ourselves for real numbers, and no one has sent us those real numbers yet. And you know what really you get hit on is not your core classes, but your elective classes. So we don't really know yet. But I can tell you that in our community, we will continue to have a performing arts program. To what extent, I don't have those answers at this point. But the person behind you has been asking those questions as well, because the board of directors are in charge of the budget, and they disperse with the superintendent in those areas so that we can meet the challenge of the curriculum. And I'm an art person. I love the fact that performing arts, visual arts are a big part of children's lives because of their expressions that they have. So thank you for that response.
Thank you, Marc.
There we go. Thank you.
I'm Sandy Long. I serve as one of 5 directors on the school board here in Port Angeles. And I spent this afternoon looking at emails that come to me each day from the Office of Public Instruction. And this afternoon, I focused on what were literally hundreds of articles about school safety from all over Washington State and all over the country. And the whole issue of school safety has been, we have just finished our strategic plan, and we have 3 beliefs that we based the board, the school board, based our school strategic plan on. And one of those beliefs is that all schools will be safe for all students. And so you can see that if we only have 3, that's a very important part. This is my question to you. Most people do not understand how schools are funded. And if we're going to be building new schools, we need a new high school, we need 2 new elementary schools. We're going to have to do it. But the way that schools are funded, the state legislature does not fund the construction of schools. Only the local communities can do that through bonds and capital levies. And just lost a capital levy that would allow us to have done a lot of things to try to obey the law that the legislatures have set down about class size and so forth. But what I'd like to ask you as community leaders and you here is to help me know the best way to educate the community about how to build new, safer schools, because safety is changing the way all schools are built in this country. If you look at school plans, they don't look anything like any of the schools we have here. Those are schools of the 60s and 70s, and they have wings and easy access in and out of every classroom. School construction is not like that anymore. So that's my question to anybody who would like to comment. How can I and the school system inform you better about how to build new, safe schools?
Sandy, I have a question for you. I'm going to answer your question with a question.
Oh,
hi. You know, I've lived here for 15 plus years now, and I have seen school levy after school levy after school levy fail in Port Angeles in particular. And I wonder if the school board and the community has a sense what the barrier is for folks. Is it just people feel financially maxed out already, which is certainly an issue in our community? Is it some belief that it's somebody else's problem? I mean, do we have an understanding of that underlying problem? Because there is a huge problem with the layout of our schools, the fact that PA High School doesn't have a fire suppression system. There's some real challenges with our existing school system. I just wonder if we can help you as a community, if we might be able to do that better if we understand why our community's not voting for the schools.
If I had the answer to that question, I would be famous and rich.
I have an idea. And my idea is that we get our legislators to come and meet with all of us. They come to town regularly. And that all the people that are in this room get together at the same time with all these legislators and bring in everybody else we can get and have them educate us about how those decisions are made here in our state and ask them what their guidance would be about what we can do to make the difference. Because that's one way we build things bigger, and also we better inform ourselves about where our money's really going and what we want to make choices about. Because we can't have everything, but there are certain things that all of us need to be able to be standing up for.
Great, thank you.
Emily has a comment on the issue.
Sorry.
I don't think there's anybody on that panel who isn't suffering from lack of funds to do the projects and programs that you want that would help this community.
Can I just have a suggestion, a response to what you asked? I think that we have a very active student body that really cared about the levy that failed, and I think that if we had more opportunity to talk in situations like this and give you our experience from inside the school, I don't know if that would make a difference, but I really hope that it would. So next time our levy comes up, ask the high school kids, because you will find some pretty well-spoken young adults that are willing to talk about this and willing to talk about the garbage cans in the middle of the 100 hall and the leaking roofs. We will talk about that. So.
Thank you, Emily. Very good.
I want to make a comment to Emily, because she's right on a lot of things, and I'm going to dovetail into that. But my question actually is for our community more so than just the panel. So first of all, when you spoke about little ones and paying attention, I work with Prevention Works with Ellen and Norman and Susan and others. We have so much evidence-based research that the programs we do when they're little, we can actually measure longevity-wise that their use of drugs is less or not at all, as well as their reading scores are higher by the 3rd grade, which is, if you're knowledgeable in reading, you're going to move forward. And actually the Sheriff's Association supports those early reading programs in the preschool level. So thank you for seeing that. My next piece is things that Wendy talked about. This is such a multifaceted issue. It's hard to tackle and get our arms around it. That's why we're here. Whether it's the weapons or individuals' behavioral health, stigmas, which we've had forever, but there's something that's happened in another state, Kansas, and another country, Sweden, I believe, and what it's called is critical conversations, community conversations. 2 years ago, Prevention Works put together on Martin Luther King Day. It was on, we wanted to talk about bullying, so we sent it out. We had about 20 people there. There was one sophomore, and the average age was 60 to 65. And we had only about 20 people. And I'm embarrassed that I gave up on that. So now I'm back to think, maybe we need to have more of these, because thank you, Betsy, for doing this. And for different situations that I've been in, and the suicides and whatnot, afterwards we talk about it. So I would like to see, and I would like to ask the youth as well, would you sit down with us old folks and let us old folks listen in community conversations that we can schedule and just talk about this? Because that's how we'll learn about how maybe the levies could pass from the youth. And you can hear from us when, like Ken talked about, what we dealt with in school. But if we don't start talking more than just afterwards, I believe these facets will just continue to grow, and we're not. But we have the power to do it as a community, and believe me, Clallam is famous for, as Ron said, working together. So I'm going to put that on Prevention Works to try and impetus that, but we'll work with the school youth as well. The other piece, I want to give you the Prevention Works website, because we're already doing some of those things with the programs we have coming up that Ellen talked about. They're just amazing how they're changing people's lives, and so they're free. They don't cost anything because folks are supporting them. The one you talked about for March 22nd, there's one March 29th, which is the one at Lincoln Center.
Yeah. 27th is the Town Hall Hope, Health, and Strength at Lincoln Center.
So Prevention Works list all these, all the things that are going on in the community from the coast all the way over to Blinn. So, and some in Seattle and such. So it's preventionworkscc.org. So the CC's for Clallam County.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, we've time for one more question, I think. Maybe two more questions.
It's the 29th.
because you
It is the 29th.
29th, okay. Take it for the beat.
There we go.
The town hall is the 29th.
Something's on
Oh, that's in your.
The 27th is Marion Birch at the hospital, and talking about we would highly recommend everyone participate if they want to, or if not, organize a forum to watch the film Resilience. We now have 2 copies of the film Resilience, one that's on loan from the school district, that talks about the neurobiology of toxic stress, and also adverse childhood experiences, what it really means, and then what's happening across the country, potential resources. So it can be checked out, and the Public Health Department just purchased their own copy. This is a really important thing for everybody who are first responders to also become aware of, and we have the best scientists in the country talking to us on this film.
Thank you, Ellen. Okay, your question?
Moses Aaron from Port Angeles. Moses Aaron from Port Angeles. I'd like to.
It's on.
It's on. I'll try again. I would like to refer to a topic many of you included in your presentations, and that was encouraging people to come forward and talk to somebody if they see an unusual behavior, event, sign, or whatever. I'm wondering how we harmonize 2 things to accomplish that kind of behavior to be in operation here. The first one is we want people to report. The second one is, particularly in the case of kids, we want children to learn how to be discriminating in regards to what they're going to tell about someone or report, or how close it is to the truth. In schools, that's particularly important. Just last week, a 7-year-old who was in the 1st grade said to me, "My teacher says we cannot tattle." I said, "What is tattle?" And essentially what she told me was that we can't say somebody did something bad. Well, I let it go. And I have heard high school students say, if you report being bullied, then the bullies are going to even come back, raise up their ante on how they treat you. So my question is, how do we, particularly for the kids who are on the lower end, the kids who are ostracized and lonely, if I sound prejudiced, I have spent most of my professional life working with children on the left hand of the bell curve, particularly those who simply don't want to follow rules and regulations, don't have a clear sense of right and wrong. And those are very important in how we stimulate that kind of behavior, encourage. The other side of that is, what do we do? What do you all do to create an environment so that people feel comfortable? It's not just encouraging someone to report something, but it is having an environment where they feel free to do so. I could name a number of situations where the very person who needs to report will not, because they're afraid they will not be protected. So 2 things I'm bringing up. One is, how do we get young people who are conscious about not becoming a tattler to still feel confident and free enough to come forward? At the same time, we teach them to be fair and honest and bring up things that need attention from others.
Okay. Well, maybe Emily can talk about the first issue with her peer group and people. As you've gone through the educational process, do you think that tattling is a bad thing? Is there a sense in the school community that's a negative thing?
Yes and no. That's kind of a hard thing to answer, because I think that a lot of the idea that tattling is a bad thing is the fact that the tattle, or the person that's telling an adult, then gets found out by somebody else. Because, you know, if you're anonymously saying, I'm seeing this behavior, I'm concerned about this, it's never going to come back to you. And I think that that happens when you're younger, because we deal, or at least this has been my experience, where if I had a problem with a kid in elementary school, the teacher would get me and that other kid together and we would talk, and then that kid would know that I said, you called me this, or whatever. So then people are afraid to come forward. I think another issue is that our generation of high school kids were really bad about that, and that where it's almost obvious that it's not real, but I think that that's a terrible habit that we're building, because then how do you differentiate between when it is a serious problem and when it's not? So I think an easy way to fix that is just if everybody started saying, this person said this immediately, and it gets handled, and then all of a sudden the kid goes, oh my gosh, I don't want to ever say that again. But I really don't know how to fix the whole tattletale thing, because that is something that has been going on forever.
That's a major issue.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you all panel for your comments. I feel a lot more knowledgeable about the protective elements in our society, and I do think our community works well together, and I'm really encouraged by the way all of our professionals work together and train together. So thank you very much, and if you have any individual questions,
There's 3 more questions, including the young person.
Go ahead.
You know, we kind of want to wind up and then you can talk to these professionals for a couple minutes before we clear the room. And the written question was, would the school district even consider arming volunteer teachers? And when schools conduct active shooter drills, do the children and teachers realize it's drills and not, and how do you address trauma that might produce?
Good question. Good question. Thank you. Ron, do you want to, or Mark, why don't you tackle that one first, if you would?
Personally, I don't think putting guns into teachers' hands is a good idea. No guns on the campus. I mean, the police officer in Florida was armed. He's a professional. He's trained to do this. And you don't know. I mean, I've worked in the United States Army at Fort Irwin for many years, and we had soldiers coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's a different set of circumstances when you are attacked. There's no, I mean, the adrenaline is flowing. There's a lot of studies out there on that, but I would really like to examine another way before I ever get to that. But drills.
I can take the second question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, and you wouldn't necessarily know this if you weren't part of like how we train together, but when we work with staff and we train, we don't do the training in a way that exposes people to what we're doing on purpose, like with the kids. We actually leave a lot of things up to schools. You know, my daughter went to 5-acre school from, pre-K to 6th grade, and that school's a small school, and I was a parent there, and they did a lot of training and preparation for kids for unusual events, but we didn't do anything like active shooter training that would be adding to the kids, whether it's high school kids, doesn't matter. We're not trying to be part of the exposure to the notion of violence, and and part of that narrative that's putting that image out. Like we trained in one of our venues down in the harbor, we actually did it in a way that we didn't get very much media coverage on purpose, and we were involving the crew on the coho. We didn't want to be actually advertising this to the world, if you understand what I'm saying. And some of the publicity and how we train, we already know how to do a lot of the stuff. We've been doing it for 15 years. You could ask the kids. We don't treat this training like it's some like static event. If we're training for this, we're actually training for something that's really a horrific set of circumstances that involve maybe people potentially losing their lives. So we take that really seriously. It's not really entertainment, and we're not. We're very sensitive to what we're adding to the people who participate or know about it. So I think that might be addressing the question, and it really isn't that kids would be like we would show up and we're doing a bunch of this training around kids and they have no idea, and then we leave. That's not how it works.
Okay.
So thanks.
Thank you. All right, I think we are out of time. Appreciate your participation and your questions, and I hope this has given us some more information to deal with. And If you have any individual questions of one of the panelists, a couple of minutes, go ahead and step forward and talk to them one-on-one. Thank you.